Coogs House. Yes, some folks out there are talking about Houston Cougar football, and yes, they're getting some things wrong, but what did they get right? Plus, elaboration more on softball.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you want to join in the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments below, wherever you found this podcast, what kind of pen is best? Bic, Uniball, Pilot, you a little flare guy? You a flare person? Whatever you like, tell us down below. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. More on that in a moment. But we got a lot of things to get into today. I want to spend a segment later talking some about softball and kind of reiterating some of the things we talked about yesterday's episode because I don't want that story to get lost or go to the wayside completely. But I want to spend the bulk of today's show talking about a preview of Houston Cougar football program that came out from the On3 establishment network group, whatever you want to call them. I'm talking about what they said because some of it I think stings, but I think some of it also rings a little true. And that I think, moreover, the truth is that it is preview time of year for a lot of people, and so you're going to see a lot of this kind of stuff out there. First and foremost, before we get into all of that, we do need to shout out some folks at the NCAA Outdoor Track and Field Championships happening this week. Christian Sampe gets third place, the bronze medal, in a pole vault of 5.52 meters, which they tell me is a lot of feet. Looks like that's over 18 feet in the air, and the pole vault gets him third place. Congrats there. Sean Maswani. Sorry, I'm trying to say that while my mouth's a little dry. He advances in the final of the 200 meters on Friday. He and Louis Hinchliffe both will be in the final in the 100 meter as well. Hinchliffe won the prelim they were both in by running a 10:09 in the 100. And let me tell you, folks, if you're not a track person, 10:09 in the 100 is flying. Now, it'd be nice if Louis or Sean or any of these guys with that kind of speed could come out with the football program right away. But the truth is that they're not. They're elite, top-end track level athletes, and that's what they're doing. And I think there's a consensus out there that speed's actually not the Houston Cougar problem. Actually, it was Monday, but things got derailed a little bit. On3 released their predictions for Houston this upcoming fall. Andy Staples runs a show over there. He and Ari Timken did a combination, kind of Timken's like the college football guy as well, over at On3, a big national publication that's going on these days. And they bounced back and forth looking at the future of the Houston Cougars and what the outlook was for this fall. And I think what's interesting is they both had incredibly positive things to say about Willie Fritz. The Willie Fritz era, they both said, was a great direction for the program. Both of them acted like they were kind of taken aback when Houston made the change from Dana last winter, and then very but they got the right guy. I'm glad they did what they did after the fact. So they maybe weren't necessarily keen on getting rid of Dana for just anybody, but then you get rid of him for Willie Fritz and that's the right way to take that. On3 is a growing, booming network with a bunch of talent, frankly, that has built up resumes at other places and now all works with On3. Impressive group of guys they got over there. And Andy and Ari both seem to know a lot about what they're talking about, but they went out with highs and lows for the Houston Cougars, and their highs were 5-7. The both of them, Andy Staples said that his low was 3-9. And Ari Timken said his low got down as low as 1-11 for the outlook on the season next year. Obviously, I think there's some things that got wrong with that. And elaborating and kind of pulling together so you don't have to go watch and read all of that. Basically, they said they like the direction of the program, but question where it's at this year. They saw the schedule, which we'll put up on the screen for the video audience right now. They saw the schedule is a very challenging schedule in and of itself. And so they said that kind of works against Houston too, whereas a softer schedule might have been a little bit different for a first year under a new head coach kind of program. So fair game on that one. And then Timken had a bit where he was really low on Donovan, and I don't think it was entirely fair. There are certainly things where he can get better. Donovan Smith, that is, quarterback for the Houston Cougars, projected starting quarterback. But he was really low on him. He talked about having his completion percentage in the low 60s being way too low for a Power 4 program, and talk about how modern college football this, modern college football that, and just didn't know where the quarterback position was going to go. I'd point out that Donovan Smith's completion percentage is really more like the mid, sometimes even high 60s on a given game. So that seems a little short-sighted as well. And then also, the future of the position of the program. We talked on this show extensively about how there's like a nice little like lineage set up from Donovan to Zion Chris, and then after him you got Austin Carlisle coming in, and after that you've got Keyshawn Henderson coming in. So like you've got talent coming in at the position across the board for a site that has a lot of great recruiting work out there. It was just an interesting thing to have to say, right? I also, for what it's worth, thought that they aren't accounting for some things and talking about that low 60s, low to mid. I think it's really more in the mid 60s completion percentage, because that's only going to go up next year, not just with another year under his belt as a starter, but also the offense is set up in a very different way. Barbay's entire offensive scheme is a lot of short, easy throws, hopefully long runs after catches. The deep balls are the kinds of things that you see thrown like when there's just a blown something over the top, or you got a one-on-one in a man coverage kind of thing. You're flipping it out deep to a guy. It's made for quarterbacks to have high completion percentages. So I would argue that that's another moot point, because it's gonna go up. I would also say that again, the schedule is tough, and I'll put it back on the screen. But 1-11, I don't know if any schedule in America is quite that tough. Ari Timken. I think that there's a lot of they've got their content, their platform. They want to get some clicks on it too. It was a negative review, and I think the bigger thing is in looking at this, you're unfortunately going to see a lot of people that are really low on Houston, right? They just are. All of the exodus in the transfer portal, people don't know how to adequately look at some of the guys coming in from smaller programs. You and I both know who AJ Halsey is, but a lot of America doesn't, right? So you and I consider that, guys, trust me on this one. But the folks at On3 don't have it the same way, right? They don't understand how strong the safety position is. I think the truth is we're going to kind of get used to this until they start winning some games to shut folks up. Obviously, as I put the schedule back up for the video audience, got to win at UNLV to open the season. Home game opening to Willie Fritz and his time at Houston, etc. I know that they're a really good Group of 5 school, but they are a Group of 5 school. The real trick is that it's going to be on not great TV networks, because it's not projected to be a great game by Vegas and the likes. But Houston heading to Oklahoma in week 2 is going to end up being kind of what do we got here kind of moment, in a weird way, a showcase kind of moment. And frankly, if you play hard, you can't really lose in the minds of a lot of people kind of moment. I don't mean to be a moral victories person, but you got people do these previews like Andy and Ari at On3 that we're talking about here, and they're laughing at the prospect of that game. You show up and show out in that one, all of a sudden people say, wait a second here, what do we got going on down here with the Willie Fritz Cougars? I think they're wrong on a lot of fronts. Moral of the story is I think Ari and Andy are wrong on a lot of fronts. I think they're just really harsh on a couple things, and I think that they're also over the top on a couple things, because it's what it is, right? I think we have to get used to seeing that some, but I do think they're right about a couple things. And I want to talk about some of that in the second segment. But first, if you're looking to get out and explore sports, comedy, theater, shows, anything going on, uh, concerts, you got to go to Game Time to get the app. Get the app, download the tickets right now because Game Time is the best place to get tickets for anything you want to get tickets to go see. They have last minute deals. You can save up to 60% by buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Flash deals, zone deals. They got all in pricing, so it's never a surprise. My favorite part, though, is that when you get tickets or when you're looking at tickets, you can go to the section and row, and it'll show you what it looks like from that vantage point, that section and row, at that venue for that type of event. So you can see kind of where you're going to be in relation to the stage, where you're going to be in relation to the court, where you're going to be in relation to the field, what's in your way, what's in your vision sight. You can see all those things. So go to Game Time, download the app today, and take the guesswork out of buying tickets to things like the NBA Finals, the NHL, Stanley Cup Finals. Right? Download Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On College, LOCKED. ONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, I said that Andy and Ari at On3 got a lot of things wrong. And I think that the overarching theme of that is we're going to get used to folks being wrong about the Houston Cougars for a little bit because they had an underachieving season last season. Frankly, while it was a better season, that they underachieved the season before as well. And so people are just kind of low on the brand right now. And, that it's funny to me that they're high on Willie Fritz and low on the brand, but people are low on the brand. But there are some things I think that Andy and Ari pointed out as far as their criticism of where they see Houston being at the end of this fall, even as high on Willie Fritz as they are, that I think are valid criticisms, right? And so I want to point out as opposed to schedule that Houston has 6 home games and 6 road games. And while I think that makes sense to the layperson watching this or listening to this, I would point out that most Power 4 programs, as they do, as Ari and Andy point out as well, most Power 4 programs find a way to skew their non-conference games, right? The pay-for-play kind of games, the home-and-home matchups, etc., to where they can line up to have more home games in a year than road games. That's both easier on your team, easier on your travel, cheaper to get to, and you get more gate revenue as a program, right? And so theoretically, in a season where you have less Big 12 oriented home games, you would be setting up your non-conference schedule to have more in-conference home, out of conference home games to match up and still have more home games. The reason Houston got screwed a little bit there is in the expansion of the Big 12. We actually were scheduled to play some of those teams, the Colorados and the Utahs of the world. I think there even was an Arizona somewhere in there. And then when they joined the conference, Houston had to scramble to find a new Power 5 non-conference team because that was kind of where they were scheduled at. The Big 12 necessitates you have one Power 5, now Power 4, one Group of 5 in your non-conference. Houston has 2 Group of 5. A lot of schools you'll see in the Big 12 actually have an FCS school. So, make that for what it's worth. But Houston kind of scramble, say, hey, Oklahoma, what do you want to do? And Oklahoma, because their schedule was set up where they needed the home game, said, we're going to play here, but you can come here. And so the home and home got scheduled as that. Whereas a lot of the time, with more time and more lead time to do it, a Power 4 team will not get stuck in a situation. 6 road games, it's suffice to say, 6 road games is going to be tough, especially when you factor in that 6 road games against Power 4 opponents, OU's in the SEC now, and then everyone in the Big 12 is obviously in the Big 12. The other thing I'll say to point out here is that all of these games on paper are games you can lose, right? UNLV can absolutely beat Houston. Rice absolutely could beat Houston, right? They did last year. Oklahoma, Cincinnati, Iowa State, Baylor, if they're not paying attention, right? All these teams can beat you. There's no one that can't beat you, as in like you're a pay for play FCS kind of school where they're just nice, having a good time making the trip and taking home the check, right? Houston doesn't have those games where other Power Four teams do, and that's going to impact the win-loss record, if anything, because you can't take a week to like just focus on yourself. You've got a game plan each week. You can't take a week to like prepare for an opponent 2 or 3 weeks online. You got to prepare for every single opponent one at a time. Like those kinds of things, I think, do add up over the season, and I understand why that would be a challenge in the eyes of many, frankly. I would point out that, well, I guess there is technically no guaranteed win because Rice did beat you last year. The quarterback and McCaffrey kid a year ago at Rice were a pretty big deal, and them not coming back to Rice next season makes them look a lot different. I'm sure they'll be good. They're still well coached. It's right. I don't need this to become clickbait, table it for them or whatever, but they are not going to be the same team. Houston's not going to be the same team. It's at Houston. Should have a good crowd. Not that it's a far road trip either, obviously, but I guess that's the closest thing you got to an auto win or shouldn't lose kind of situation. I think UNLV is also going to be a great crowded environment. It's a night game. It's Willie Fritz's first game at the helm. It's at Houston. Nice to have that one at home. I think, honestly, if I'm picking things here, I think Houston has some advantages in that one. UNLV is not going to have a whole lot of tape on Houston either besides the spring game, and that's very elementary. I think that should work well for Houston, all those factors, but I guess it's not a game you can write off because that's a very good group of 5 team, right? Another scheduling thing I think that they both got right is that the stretch of games in the middle of the season where you play at Kansas at Arrowhead on the 19th of October, at Utah on the 26th of October, and at Kansas State at home against Utah and at home against Kansas State on the 2nd of November is also really, really challenging. Yes, you have a bye week before Kansas. And yes, frankly, you've got a little bit of time afterwards between Kansas State and the Arizona game. But that is a really, really difficult stretch of 3 games for anyone in America, not just Houston. That'd be tough for your Alabamas of the world, your Georgias of the world, etc. That's a tough stretch of 3 games to play. Frankly, looking at 3 of the 4 or 5 teams people are projecting to win the conference, bang, 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 one after the other. And as far as the way that these things go with football seasons, what Andy and Ari got right is that can be detrimental to the headspace. That can be the kind of game those kinds of games that test your depth over the course of the 3 weeks, etc. And so then, yes, you play Baylor and BYU to wrap the season. I think you should beat Baylor. I think you can beat BYU even if it's at their place. But on the whole, really, if you're coming off of that tough stretch in the middle there, where's the morale? Do you have guys thinking about transfer portals? If you go 0-3 there, what's your record looking like? Are guys hanging it up? Right? That could all happen. And that's a very human way to look at it. And I think that that's fair. I don't think it happens under Fritz. I think Fritz keeps a control on all of that. All indications are he's the kind of guy that will keep a control on all that. But if you're looking at, from a national perspective, where do you see holes in this? I see one there. The other thing they've all brought up, both Ari and Andy, is the personnel. I said I thought that they were hard on Donovan, and I stand by that. I do think they were hard on Donovan. One thing I don't think they were hard on, I think they were appropriately questioning, is all of the turnover on the linemen. I think that you got a lot of guys that have shown promise and talent. I think, honestly, Demetrius Pancake Hunter, he could be the kind of guy that's an all-conference guy very soon, right? I think there's talent on the interior offensive line, especially. The tackles, figuring things out, but the interior guys are really strong. The defensive line, I think, is pretty sturdy, but it's also guys that haven't actually had a whole lot of Power 4 reps. I think that they project to be good, but right. The turnover there leads to a lot of question marks because you lose Don Nwankwo, because you lose Patrick Paul, because you graduate Jack Freeman, because, right? Like these guys are needing to find replacements. And whatever you thought about line play a year ago, I thought Houston honestly had times where the offensive line looked like they struggled. It looked like they struggled on defense, stopping the run. Sometimes the interior. I thought it was more linebackers than linemen, but regardless, you did see issues last year with where the linemen were. And so suddenly it's like, wait a second, we have to also now figure that out for this year with a whole bunch of new bodies and faces. And it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot. And I think that Ari and Andy bring that up briefly, and they focus on things like Donovan a lot more. And I think that's kind of where I would flip this is I think the bigger problem to me is Donovan running around for his life at times, right? Is there a way to alleviate that pass rush with the kinds of running game things we know that Barbre wants to do? That's where I would look to see how can Houston find a way to win games, even if Ari and Andy have some things that are right. Right. Again, there's gonna be a lot of these previews out there, and they're gonna have some things that they get wrong, some things that they get right. We're gonna have to. I mean, I'm not gonna break down every single one. I got a lot of respect for the guys over at On 3 do, and so I wanted to talk about that one some because it's a fairly prominent publication with some, I won't say negative talk about Houston. And so, yeah, so I want to make sure we touch on it some. I also want to spend the last segment touching some on yesterday's episode with Sam of Scott Home Podcast about softball. So on Tuesday's show, Sam and I recorded a thing Monday night talking about the softball incident. And I want to stress, like, this was frantically thrown together, but a story that kind of had to get out there, right? And the goal of having Sam on was honestly, Sam and the folks at Scott and Holman did a great job of doing some investigative reporting, getting some sources. Sources reached out to them to kind of start the whole thing, get the ball rolling. They took it from there, right? And the goal was to kind of elaborate and continue to tell that story. And then I thought that there was an interesting sports angle, like how does this actually impact the play that they maybe didn't cover because it's not the most important thing. And I, think somebody should cover, right, as well, as even though it's not the most important thing, it's not important either, right? And there was a lot of talk. First of all, I should point out that Sam and I, much like a lot of folks in this industry, and when we start talking, we can also just start talking rambling. And I think there are people that confuse it as to what the allegations are. So allegedly, a couple of things were going on with the softball program. There allegedly was a player that was carrying a firearm and potentially threatening ways around the softball program. And people very quickly responded like, it's a 2A state part. It's a 2A country. I understand Texas is a big 2A state. I understand that concealed is this, concealed is that. I also know that a lot of the places college athletes travel are supposed to be gun-free zones and things like that. And so there's a lot of murkiness there. Facilities, NCAA laws, bylaws, etc. All of those kinds of things would also come into play here. And on top of all of it, the idea that there's threatening things involved would negate a lot of the different concerns people are trying to bring up. I'm not trying to infringe on constitutional rights, I'm trying to make sure kids are safe. And I think that is part of the concern too. So that was one allegation. There were allegations about psychological things involving cutting off the nutritionist and the work from some of that support staff in that direction to the softball program. Kids are in facilities for athletics for hours and hours and hours. Doing things like not allowing food and drink inside is, I think, something people didn't necessarily click to being detrimental when you think about, like, oh, these kids are spending 8, 9, 10 hours or more in the facility. By the time things are all said and done, I mean, on a game day, right? All the things that, like, that adds up, and I don't want that to go unseen. I think that we just talked about that, Sam and I did, in a way that people didn't necessarily click to, didn't necessarily get right with, as far as like, oh, that's a problem because you're there so long, right? And then there was just like this aggressive culture built into it, players and fighting and coaches potentially threatening with fighting and, and things back and forth. That I think is like the sprinkles on top. Sam said it on the show yesterday, but I would stress too that like if that were the only thing happening there, right? It'd be like, okay, but like we also know that Michael Jordan broke Steve Kerr's nose at practice one time. Like there's some level of aggression that I think is part of sports. I think in this instance, it seems like another piece to an already building puzzle. I should stress that all of these allegations were made anonymously by softball players to the folks with Scott and Holman. That's why Sam was on to talk about it. So I had people reaching out to me, Parker, this isn't Googleable. I can't find anything and like acting as if that negated it when I'm like, yeah, because the person that reported all was the person on the show, right? And then last but not least, and I think this is the thing that bugged me the most. Bugged me the most might be too far to go. But a thing that bugged me was there was a few comments about, taking easy shots here, or the idea that like hadn't talked about softball all year and now this pops up and blah, blah, blah. And I should point out, Locked on Cougs is 18 months old, and maybe the growth curve is different for different people or different shows or what have you. But generally speaking, in sitting down to talk about the Houston Cougars with you each and every day of the show, we're trying to talk about things that you've demonstrated you want to talk about, right? And I think that there's a lot of angles people can take as to how to judge what people want to talk about. The easiest angle is, what do you click on? Like when I had Jeremy Branham on last year at the start of baseball season to preview Houston Cougar baseball in spring of 2023, is one of the least watched and listened to episodes in the entirety of the podcast. It just was. And Jeremy's a great guest. Fun story on that one actually is I was so nervous and embarrassed. I like introduced him as an ESPN person because of his background on ESPN radio, and like didn't mention his Houston Cougar stuff, right? Like I was just like, I get to talk to Jeremy Brand about baseball right now, right? But if people don't watch the things, then I'm only left to assume y'all don't want to talk about the things. Now, yesterday's softball episode was the kind of thing I think people needed to hear. The story needed to get out there, and people did click on it. So we're going to keep talking about it, and I don't want this story to go away. I would like for justice to be served where needed. If it's not needed, I'd like to know why. I'd like to know a lot about this story that is still not being put out there, right? However, I don't like this idea of like Parker's only talking about because what I want to talk about, honestly, I'm a basketball coach. I can do basketball all the time, right? Other Locked On shows don't talk about basketball at all because their fan bases don't want to talk about it at all. Houston Cougar men's basketball program has had some success. People like talking about it. That does great. You guys seem to like to talk about basketball. When I bring up the women's program, crickets happen. And I had fairly big concerns with the women's basketball program. I think there's a lot of directions it needs to go, and it's not heading in any of them, right? But all in all, if you don't tell me you want to watch or talk about that kind of stuff on a daily basis because you're not clicking on it, I don't know how I'm supposed to know that, right? I think there's a lot of great angles. We opened the show by congratulating several great track athletes for the things they're doing at the men's outdoor championships this week. I mean, it's an athletic campus with a lot of great things, but I also can track through analytical data about the shows what you guys tune into and don't tune into and don't want to watch and don't want to listen to. We did several weeks where we talked about volleyball for the third segment of last of episodes for like several days in a row when the volleyball team was having a great run. No one listened, so I assumed y'all don't want to talk about it. And I think that's where I'm like, well, I don't like that. Like, I'm trying to talk about what you want to talk about. And I feel like that was an unfair pot shot that I probably spent too long talking about right now, but it bugged me. And I like talking about the Cougs, and I want this story to get right, mostly because here's what I really hope to happen. I hope there actually was a thorough investigation, actually was thorough research done, and there actually is a second side of the story that we don't know. That would make me feel a lot more comfortable about the people involved, is that like, oh no, Parker, like they really did do this. It was internal because it's college kids and we don't want to put everything out there. But like the other side is, right? And then it's like, okay, like suddenly things make more sense now, right? That's the way. I don't know how that side would go. I don't know what that side would be, but I do think that like there's a chance for that to happen, and that'd be the kind of thing I'd want to happen. I just don't know that it does. Now, again, thank you for making it this far in the show. I assume that means you want to talk about softball or maybe hear me rant. But if you want to talk about the Houston Cougars in any way, style, or capacity, you can follow me at Painsworth512, PAINSWORTH 512 on any and all social media platforms. Happy to talk about all things Houston Cougars, especially like everyone in my house is sick right now. So like tweeting about the Cougs would be a lot more fun. So find me on X and talk about the Cougs with me. Thanks. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, our Houston Cougars, each and every day. Go Cougs.